Right then. Okay, hello, willkommen, bienvenue. Time for the Amish Inquisition episode 372 on Sunday the 13th of April 2025. I'm Phil.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Matt.
And tonight we're very happy to be joined by author and Templar researcher Kathleen Ball. How are you doing, Kathleen?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful Sunday morning.
It's that old trick where as soon as we start the stream,
It's fabulous the last few days. So I'm enjoying. I've already been out to the local redwood forest and done a little walking and met with some people, some friends this morning. I've already been up and out, in it because it's just so gorgeous today.
Nice.
What time? Whereabouts are you? Sorry, Kathleen. We just lost your audio just for a split second at the beginning.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, you're back now. It's fine. Sorry, whereabouts are you?
I beg your pardon?
Whereabouts are you located?
Oh, I'm in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It's a little town called Felton. And this is actually our sort of a summer vacation home that we have. But I'm down here a lot more because I'm writing my second book now. So this is a place that's quiet, it's peaceful, it's in the redwoods, it's, I have the ocean 15 minutes from me, and it's it just works really well when I'm writing.
Oh, gorgeous. Excellent. Well, you mentioned the book. I'll throw this is not the book that you're working on, the one that's out now. Just saw the cover up for people who are watching. A Grail Quest, Discovery of a Mysterious Knights Templar Cave in Brazil.
That's miles away.
When did this come out, Kathleen, this book?
It came out 2 years ago in July. It was at 2023, I guess it was in July. And it was a long time coming. I don't sit still well. I'm a boots on the ground researcher. I love to be out there, digging up stuff, and I really enjoy that. That's who I am. And so I actually wrote this book during COVID, during the whole COVID lockdown. And now I'm struggling to get the second book out because it's so hard for me to sit still. But I have some phenomenal information that I have discovered since I wrote that book, that first book, that I really feel it's important to get it out there. So I am forcing myself, to get this second book out.
Cool. What do you think it is about the Knights Templar that captures people's imagination?
Well, they're mysterious. It's a mysterious order. I mean, we've been told so many things, like, that these original 9 knights, right, in 1118 were were organized to protect pilgrims going into the Holy Land, which doesn't even hold water. If you think about that, 9 knights are going to protect thousands of people that are coming into the Holy Land. It just, it's a story that, I find it really hard to believe that it was ever concocted because it's so unbelievable, and I'm sure that they may have assisted, pilgrims going into the Holy Land. I'm sure that may have been something that they came across or that they were involved in to some degree, but their primary reason for going into the Holy Land was to excavate under the Temple Mount. That was their primary reason. They had been in Constantinople and all through Greece. What they had been doing and what they were doing in the Holy Land was searching for the ancient esoteric belief systems, the Gnostic Gospels. They were connected with the Druze and the White Brotherhood in Constantinople. And this goes all the way back to 1090. So they had been doing all this for 30 years before they became the Knights Templar, and dubbed by the Catholic Church, as the Crusader order. And I think what they were doing was pretty sneaky, actually. Here they had, this official stamp from the Catholic Church, but they were actually in Portugal. They were creating a sovereign nation of equality, and they were pulling in, they even rescued the Cathars and had the Cathars there. They had Islam. they had Moors, they had the Christians, they had Jews, they had Druze, they had, you know, all these Gnostic people of Gnostic beliefs, and they were protecting them in Portugal. And what they were doing was gathering all this esoteric knowledge and gathering all these people from all walks of life living in Portugal. And I believe that it was literally a template for what they wanted to see happen in the rest of the world. And my research has just continues to point to that. Every country that I go in and I see their presence, I see that they're at least their inner circle, their core, were made up of men that were very intelligent. They could read and write, which was very rare at that time. Now, most of the other, you know, the soldiers and a lot of the laymen that were involved in the Knights Templar and were part of that organization did not read and write, but their inner core were made up of very intelligent men. And what they wanted to do was bring about a renaissance, was bring all this information to the surface to sort of upend the Catholic Church. Not sort of, actually, that's what they really wanted to do, was to give the people, the populace, this information that they had access to a God without the church, and that there were initiations that you could go through, that you could find God within and realize that God within. So, I mean, that's one of the stories, basically, of the Grail, of a Grail quest, is to find the God within you that Jesus talked about. And also the other thing that they believed, that Jesus was not the initiator of the Christian. It wasn't even a religion. It wasn't even called a religion. It was a belief system that John the Baptist was. And that, of course, was heretical. And that got them in trouble in 1307. That was one of the things that identified them, you know, that the church could say, okay, you're a heretic because you believe in John the Baptist, not Jesus. And also they worshiped Mary Magdalene. So but these were all kept in secret. These were all private. These were their beliefs that they held dear to their heart. And they practiced initiations, which is the basis and foundation for the Mason, the Masonic order, the Rosicrucian orders that we are aware of today, the 33 degrees that they, you know, initiations that they practiced. So they had all this secret life that was going on under the rug, so to speak. And in the meantime, you know, they were continually searching out the esoteric and trying to bring back the spiritual belief systems that had existed and were practiced freely prior to the Younger Dryas and prior to the Great Flood, before the civilizations were destroyed at that time. And this was one of their primary interests. And I've had long discussions with our Grand Master here, the Gnostic Order, Timothy Hogan, about this. And they have a vested interest even today. This is what they want to see. They want to see, you know, a world of equality, a world that religious practices, spiritual practices, cultural beliefs, economic statute, whatever, is all accepted and tolerated. And I think this is the ideal that they would like to see happen. And this is the topic of my book. My second book is The Templar Agenda. Right. So I'm going to be discussing all of that. I am discussing that at length in my second book. So.
Wow, excellent. I didn't think we were going to get to the Younger Dryas in this conversation. It's not, the Templars and Younger Dryas aren't like two topics that are like next to each other in my brain.
I know, it's
not,
like,
not until this moment.
Not many people knew that they were aware of Atlantis, and that they were very vested in those ancient civilizations of Lemuria and Atlantis. You know, that some of the relics and some of the things they have 6 Arks of the Covenant in their possession. You know,
now we're talking about modern day Templars, so there is an organization Still going today,
Yes.
called the
So,
Templars in North America, right?
right. This is a modern day Templar organization that goes back. These are just the descendants of original Templar lines that go all the way back to the original Templar organization. So,
Oh.
what happened in 1307, from 1307 to 1312, when King Philip the Fair came down on the Catholic Church, I mean on the Templars, along with the Catholic Church, and attempted to suppress them, and he did a good job in France,
Hmm.
but that didn't happen in the other countries in Europe. In many of the other countries, that's not what happened. And essentially, what happened in Portugal, it didn't happen at all, because the king in Portugal at the time, King Dennis, he just converted the Knights Templar to the Knights of Christ, and they didn't lose a thing. They still maintained all their castles, all their churches, everything, all their businesses, everything was still intact until the Inquisition got in the 1500s. So, um, so what was happening with this suppression is they just went underground. They just went underground, and then eventually we see the Masons, the Masonic orders popping up, and many of those original members of the Masons were, they were descendants of Templar families.
And am I right in thinking they were generally French noblemen to start with, and then did it spread out from there?
Yeah, well, the French noblemen, in fact, it's interesting because Portugal is made up of French and Spanish noblemen. The originals, the founders of Portugal were made up of French and Spanish noblemen who, by the way, were also Templars. The very first king in Portugal was a Templar. So, we had a concentration, a huge concentration and population of Templars in France. But in my research over the last 10 years, I'm convinced that the real important area, the real important stronghold was actually in Portugal, in Tomar, Portugal, not necessarily in France. I have come to believe that France was more of a facade. It was, they had a lot going on there, yes, and they were privy to everything that was going on in Tomar, but Tomar was the nuts and bolts, and Portuguese Templars were the nuts and bolts. I really believe at this point in my research.
Right. And so they sort of start off in France and they go to the Holy Land, and they're sort of early archaeologists, if you like. They're doing excavations on Temple Mount looking for certain things. And then we get this sort of suppression. It's a couple of hundred years later, isn't it? 1307. Oh, it's where we get Friday the 13th from, isn't it?
Yeah, they, the suppression was, it was, in France, it was really thorough. I mean, they hid out into small areas. Now, I just recently found, like I said, when I was doing my research in the UK in August, I went back into France also for 2 weeks, and I hired a photographer, and we went in. I just retraced some of my steps, and I also went to some places I hadn't been to before. So I found out the Templars were not only held in Dome, France, they were also held in Chinon, which is another small town. And throughout my travels between Chinon and back into Dome, I discovered a small little town called Septimus in France with this beautiful 12th century, I think it was dated to 1160 or something, um, beautiful little Templar church. And what was interesting about this church was that they had it looked like it was a baptismal basin. Possibly it was really big, but the iconography on all four corners of this huge basin that I discovered there was almost identical to what, I don't know if you're familiar with the Lost Relics with Hamilton White and Carl Cookson, both from the UK. I don't know if you're familiar, but
No.
they had a program called the Lost Relics of the Knights Templar, and they had some authentic Templar relics. And one of the chalices that they have, that Hamilton has actually shown me this, and we realized, the similarity between the iconography is almost identical to this chalice, this one chalice that these fellows have, that Hamilton White has. And it just blew my mind, blew his mind too. That was not even on my path, my research path. We were driving and we were heading back towards Dome and from Chinon. And I went, oh my God, wait a minute. That looks like a Templar cross on that church. And we flipped the car around and, went back. And, I have these really synchronistic things that happen. And this was another one. We tried to find who was in charge of the church, how we could get in. I wanted to, take some photographs. Well, it turned out this fellow on the corner says, oh, go to the baker, go over here to the baker. And we go to the baker and the baker hands me the key and says, just bring it back when you're done.
Wow.
And this has happened to me numerous times. I've been handed the key to the first time that I went to Dome, France in 2009. I was handed the key, the same thing, and said, go and look and do what you want, photograph and bring the key back when you're done, So I kind of feel like, this whole journey that I've been on, this whole quest has been guided. I really feel like I've been guided because I've, nobody even knew there was a Templar cave in Brazil. Nobody even knew there was Templars in Brazil. So, to stumble upon that like I did in 2015 was, there had to been some otherworldly thing going on there, because we ended up going right to it, and it was such a fluke the way the whole thing happened. Just the whole thing, all the synchronicities that led up to that discovery were phenomenal. The odds of even one of them happening were just probably 1,000,000 to 1.
Do you think the Templars landed in Brazil basically as an escape, so to escape the authorities from Portugal, or do you think there was an existing sort of trading going on before the suppression by Philip?
Initially, I thought that that was my theory, was that they were escaping what was happening in Portugal, and I thought that maybe they went into Brazil from Portugal during the time of Henry the Navigator. But I have since then changed that opinion, and I now have a theory that I have pretty strong evidence for, that they were actually traveling back and forth between Portugal and Brazil as early as the 12th century, possibly 13th century. I'm talking 1100s and 1200s. Right. And the reason I say this is there are some specific Templar crosses and symbols that are inside this cave that are identical to churches in Portugal that were sacred churches that the Templars, that they worshipped in and that they did their initiations in, that go all the way back to 1040. And they're on this little coastline. This little area is called Peniche. And I found this one particular church there in Antuguia, which is adjacent to Peniche. And the church was built by the Templars in 1040. From 1040 to 1090, this church was constructed. And the symbols in that church are, again, it was used for initiation, identical to what is in my cave. Oh, and the other thing is that 2 years after I discovered the cave, when I went back the first time in 2017 to refilm it, and I wanted to get some more information, I discovered that the cave is a gold mine. It was at one time. Yeah.
Well, they're famous for being like into the financials, aren't they, Templars? That would make sense. They're often credited with inventing sort of international checking, aren't they? You deposit your gold in Paris and pick it up in Jerusalem, kind of thing.
Right. So that was a phenomenal discovery. But I suspected it the first time I went in, because why I was there is the fellow that owned the land adjacent to the land that this cave is on owns what they call a camping pousada. And we were visiting a waterfall. And when we came up, he asked us if we wanted to go and see this crystal mine, that there was all these crystals all over, and there was this huge vein of quartz crystal that went through the property. And coming from my other home that I live in is in Amador County, coming from Amador County, which is the center of gold discovery in California, it's called the Gold Country. I'm very well aware that where you find gold, you always find crystal, but where you find quartz crystal, you don't always find gold. But so that led me to some suspicion that the cave may have been used for, it may have been a gold mine. But then I had it confirmed by several of the local people who had been still mining it. So for quite some time.
Do you know, we were talking sort of 11th, 12th century, and
Yeah.
we know for a fact that Columbus got there in the 15th century. Is there much difference as far as technology goes? I'm thinking of like seafaring. Was there like major technological leaps between the ships of Columbus's day and the ships of the Templars' day?
Well, there's a story about that too. We'll get into Columbus. Columbus was not Columbus.
Oh.
He was not Italian. He was the real Columbus. The man that was really Columbus was Portuguese, and his name was not Christopher Columbus. He came from the Castelo Branco family, and I interviewed one of his great granddaughters. But the reason that they were able, well, the Portuguese were the first shipbuilders that we knew of in the the medieval ages. They were the first ones to be building ships. And why is that? Other than the Vikings. Okay, the Vikings preceded them. But while they were in the Holy Land and while they were in Constantinople, and many of their descendants were also Vikings, they came from families that had been Vikings. They got a hold of all the Phoenician boat, the maps and the boat building information of how to build these boats, how the Phoenicians were building boats. And we do know that the Phoenicians were traveling all over. They were all over the world. So before then. So they were, these were seaworthy ships. And we have reason to believe now that there's a theory that it was proposed to me about 2 years ago that the Peniche was originally, it was not a coastal town in Portugal. It was originally an island, and it led out to a series of islands that if you look straight out from Peniche, you look out to the Azores. And we know for a fact that the Templars were back and forth in these small islands. In fact, this man that was what we call Christopher Columbus, the real Christopher Columbus, came from one of these islands called Madeira. And anyway, one of the theories that has been proposed to me, and I'm starting to look more seriously at this, is that they followed the migration route of the crows from Madeira and from these islands in the Azores all the way into South America. And that's how they landed in Bahia, which is now Bahia in South America. And from there, they hooked up with Amazonian tribes who took them into Alto Paraiso, which is now Alto Paraiso, and Moina and Cavalcanche and San George, these little towns that surround the area where I found the first cave. And we also know, I've interviewed the Amazonian tribal natives there. They still come into Alto Paraiso every year in July, every year. And there's 5 tribes that come in, and and their stories involve bringing white men in robes into that area hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And then we also have the Kalunga, who were the slaves that were brought in by the Portuguese slavers and Spanish slavers into what is now known to be Brazil now. And the Kalunga came in the 1400s, the late 1400s and early 1500s. And many of them who ran, they're called Kalunga because they separated from they ran. They escaped when the ships landed. They took off, and they just took off running. And those that survived, they went up into what is now Alto Paraiso, Moino, Cavalcanche, and San George. And guess where they lived? Guess where they stayed? In these caves that were Templar caves. So we know that the caves were there prior to the 1400s. We know for a fact. We know that the symbols inside the cave are identical to a 11th century church. And also they're identical to some crosses that are in Dome and also in Chinon. And also I found interesting on a couple of churches in the UK that I've gone into, and Royston Cavern. They're also, some of the same symbols are in Royston too, which I found really interesting because that's much later. But anyway, so we have what we suspect is early travel back and forth to South America. And we also now know that they were in North America in the 1300s as well. So, you know, these guys were just, the Portuguese are very tight-lipped. And I have numerous examples of them just being very tight-lipped, you know. They told everyone in the European continent that Brazil was a little island called Vera Cruz, which means the true cross. But they told them it was an island. No one believed that, no one even suspected that it was an entire tip of an area on a continent. No one even had any idea, you know, until the 1500s, until after, you know, Columbus opened up that door, you know. So I just find it phenomenal that they were able to keep that secret. But if you think about it, it makes sense, because during the time of the, you know, of the suppression of the order, when France was broke, England was broke, all the other countries that had participated in these crusades were broke, but not King Dennis in Portugal. He still had, you know, tons of money. He was building boats. He was building all kinds of things. You know, I mean, they were getting ready to venture out on the whole navigational period in Portugal. They had silver, they had gold. I have reason to believe that the silver came from Peru and the gold came from Brazil.
Right. Yeah. You know, something that occurred to me just then when you were talking about the Templars landed in Brazil. I remember from reading like Fingerprints of the Gods decades ago, Hancock's book, and he talks about when the conquistadors arrived and during the colonization, there was this sort of South American folklore of these sort of white bearded guys coming and civilizing the natives. It's kind of an unpopular kind of theory to talk about these days in the political climate, and it just made me wonder, well, if the Templars were a few hundred years before that, could it have been the Templars they were referencing? Because they probably had long beards and robes and whatnot.
Oh yeah, yeah. They well, see, because of the fact that they gathered all this esoteric knowledge and stuff too, that they had already had that, they were well aware of the indigenous cultures in North America and in South America. They were well aware of their practices. In fact, you know, some of the Mason handshakes that they do that are secret to identify each other are practiced by the Hopi in North America and also in South America amongst some of these native Amazonian tribes. So, you know, we have reason to believe that, you know, they had these secret initiations that went way, 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 way back that they practiced, and they were also being practiced by the natives in these countries. And so what the theory is at this point, which is a broad theory, but there's several of us Templar researchers that are looking at this now, is that at the fall of Atlantis, when Atlantis sunk, you know, there was a few people that were dispersed. There were several people that were dispersed from Atlantis and went into South America, North America. We know that Egypt, you know, in Africa, Egypt evolved after that, and some of the pyramids in Mexico and South America and Central America developed around that time, when we had these very intelligent people that were supposedly guiding, you know, all these cultures, and also in India. So it stands to reason that the remnants of these civilizations, that stemmed from Atlantis and Lemuria, that their descendants were these Native Americans from South America, North America, and into the Tamil Nadu is one of the most ancient cultures in India. And the more I study that culture, I see a lot of similarities with the coastal Californian Native Americans. The symbolism, their boat building skills, many of them are identical. So it just tells me that these ancient esoteric beliefs stemming from Atlantis and Lemuria were well known by the native cultures in every single continent. And so, it doesn't surprise me at all that the Templars were guided and became friends with these native cultures because their beliefs were very similar.
Wow, because they came from the same source, essentially.
Yeah. It's phenomenal.
Yeah. One of the most romantic stories I hear about the Templars that sparks my imagination is that after 1307, they fled to Scotland and fought under Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn and defeated the English. What's your take on that story? Is that myth or history or a bit of both?
One of my favorite topics because the Templars, I believe, I know they were in Scotland. I come from a Templar family in Scotland. There's a MacGregor, there's a Duncan Maceo MacGregor from the he died in 1290 something. Maceo is a Portuguese Brazilian appellation that describes a body of water. It can be a coastal body of water, it could be a lake or whatever. But I have reason to believe that he was one of the Templars that may or may not have been back and forth to Brazil, for one thing. And the other thing is that the Templars, like I said earlier, wanted to use what they had accomplished in Portugal of this sovereign nation of harmony. They wanted to bring this and spread it throughout the European continent. So when they went into Scotland, they were very much involved in the Magna Carta, which, as you know, is the basis for the not Declaration of Independence, but the Bill of Rights and whatnot, and that became later the foundation for the United States, which we know for a fact was founded by Masons. So I just find it fascinating how they still influenced many, many, many governments from behind the scenes. In fact, they may have been more effective under the rug than they were above board, But I have no doubt that they were involved with Robert the Bruce, Culloden, many of the struggles that were going on between England and Scotland during that time. I firmly believe, as I know one of my ancestors who was a Templar was at Culloden. So it stands to believe. I mean, if we look at private families and their history, instead of reading history books, instead of, reading what's been funneled down to us and spoon-fed to us, and which is always someone else's interpretation of history, it's what they want us to believe. And, we're really seeing that. We're seeing the lid being blown off that right now. We have been spoon-fed, excuse my language, but baloney for a very long time.
I don't think you have to apologize for baloney. But something I do want to ask you.
I was going to say another word, but I decided to
you can say bullshit if you want. Kath, you've mentioned a couple of times about familial links or sort of bloodlines, ancestors of Templars. But one thing I need to ask you is, most people, if they read like a standard history book, will tell you that the Knights had to give up all the worldly goods and had to take a vow of celibacy and such like. So how do you sort that contradiction out? Where did the family come in?
Well, they did take a vow of celibacy, and they were known as the poor knights of the Temple of Solomon. So, but what they did was everything that they were given went towards the collective. So the organization became, I mean, it just expanded exponentially.
Yeah.
By the 13th century, there were hundreds of thousands of Templars on the European continent. And once you have to also remember that once the Templars were dissolved, they were no longer bound
Right.
by, right? So what I discovered in Brazil, I've met one descendant from the Templars who currently still lives in Brazil, and he comes from a Templar family. And so what happened when they went to Brazil, so I know this as an example, is they married into the local culture that was there. And they just became a part of the landscape, basically. But what is really fascinating about Alto Paraiso and Moinho and Cavalcante and São Jorge is it is the only area in all of South America that I have ever been to, and I've been to several countries there, that you will find people from all walks of life, all religious backgrounds, all cultural backgrounds living in harmony.
That's a rare
I
thing.
don't think that's
isn't it?
an accident. I
Yeah.
really don't think that's an accident. There is something there that once you go to Alto Paraiso, they say you always come back, you will always return. And this is what I hear from so many people. I mean, I know people there. I have several friends now. I have about 25 people or 30 people that I know from India, from China, from Japan, from Africa, from all over the world that live there.
Going back to the dissolution, do you think that some of the Templars might have infiltrated the other monastic orders, like the Hospitallers or the Teutons, and maybe sort of took over those groups?
That they might have infiltrated the Gnostic orders?
Sorry, so when they were outlawed, when the Templars were outlawed, as I understand it, a lot of their holdings and their land was given over to the Hospitallers. I'm just wondering if you thought some of the knights themselves might have joined up with the Hospitallers or the Teutonic Order, or dispersed more widely across you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely, I believe that. Yeah, I believe that they did. They just sort of melted into, as quietly as possible into the other orders that were developing. They were not going to give up their plan. They were not going to give up their agenda, and they still today want to see that agenda happen. They're still very much invested. In fact, I highly would suggest, if you are interested in interviewing a man called Timothy Hogan over here in the United States. He's the Grand Master of this order here.
Yeah.
And he comes from a family of Templars and Masons, and he just has phenomenal history about the Templars and information. He's the one now that's he's opening up the secrets that have been held dear to the Masons, and all these, all Rosicrucians have all. If you're a member of these orders, you can't talk about this stuff. Well, he's breaking it out. He's giving it to the public now. He's got several programs that are on YouTube now, and he's just opening this stuff up. The alchemical process of coming out with this manna, the white powder,
Yeah.
that we found in Egypt in the Great Pyramid, and has also been talked about in the Bible and many other esoteric belief systems all over the world. He's creating this now, and he's getting it out, and he will give you the recipe of how to create it, how to do it. So this is a time, this is phenomenal. I love that word, but as you can probably tell, but this is just such an exciting time in history right now, because the secrets are coming to the surface, and they're being shared, by a lot of these esoteric groups and organizations for the enlightenment and uplifting of the human species right now in this time in history, in our evolutionary process right now. And I think that it's really vital that people get this information. and they understand their own power as human beings, and that we were not just created to go to work every day, work our tails off for some group of oligarchs that are living off of our labor, off of our emotional energy, off of we were not created as a slave race. So we were all created equal under the sight of God. And this is a very strong belief amongst the Templars, and also amongst several other esoteric organizations. So,
well, to bring it to the modern day, so it was Philip the Frere originally who had his axe to grind with the Templars because he owed them so much money for other reasons, and then you mentioned earlier the Inquisition, the Catholic Church, and the Inquisition were after the Templars and the Cathars and whatnot. Who's like the nemesis of the Templars in the modern day, do you think?
What is the what? I'm sorry.
Who's the nemesis, the enemy of the Templars in the modern day?
Oh, right now?
Yeah.
Well, if you talk to the Templars, they really rise above that issue, and they don't really they see everyone as a spark of God, no matter how much darkness is in them. Now, I know from my own personal experience that during my research, as in Portugal, for one thing, I was approached by Opus Dei, which is a arm of the Catholic Church. They're sort of the fixers for the Catholic Church. And the man that I was approached and told specifically that I couldn't photograph in that church I was telling you about in Antigua, after I had applied to the Office of Patrimony and been given full permission 2 weeks before I even got there. We had set a date, and I had been given full position. I had my photographers in there, the man that met me from the Office of Patrimony, the priest was there. We were all on board until this man comes waltzing in and says, "You can't photograph in here." And I said, "On whose authority?" And he said, we started rattling off a bunch of baloney, and I knew it was baloney. And I said, "Okay, you and I need to go outside and have a conversation right now." And we did. We walked in, and he just was step back. And I said, "Who are you? And whose authority do you have to tell me this?" I have permission. You can talk to the man inside from the Office of Patrimony. I applied months ago for this, and I've come over from the United States. I have, a photography team that I hired, and how can you tell me this? Well, he just kept slithering around the whole topic. But when I looked him up, I did some research on the guy. Turns out he was Opus Dei, and not only is he Opus Dei, he is the advisor to the president of Portugal on religious protocol. So, if you really want to talk about pushback to the Templar agenda, I would include that group I would include Opus Dei in that group of people.
Right. Yeah, it kind of makes you think that maybe the Templars had access to documents or evidence that would shake the Catholic Church to its sort of foundations. That's sort of the vibe that you hear in certain books.
And the Catholic Church knows they do. They know that
they probably have the same documents, the same copies in the archive.
Yeah, they know, and they still to this day. Opus Dei is involved in this Project 2025, this idiotic thing that's going on here in the United States. There's Opus Dei and are 3 of the authors in that. So, they haven't given up with their intent on controlling and the masses, for their own purposes. That has never gone away. I ran across this huge book. It was literally this thick in the Rosicrucian Library during research several years ago, about 5 years ago. And each chapter is about another country in South America where the Jesuits came in and hunted down Templars, their descendants, and Masons, and any family members, and murdered them.
What time period?
Whole book, this whole book, that's what the topics are about. Every single chapter. And you can find it in the Rosicrucian Library in the research department.
When was that happening? What time period was that happening?
What? I'm sorry?
What time period was that happening?
This was in the 1500s, 1600s, all the way up through into the 1800s.
Wow.
So this was going on for a very long time. This strategic attempt to annihilate the Templars, Mason, the Masonic Order, and anyone who was affiliated in South America.
Gosh.
And this is the Jesuit. These were the Jesuits that were doing this.
Right. It's just so dangerous when an organization has so much power at its fingertips. And,
well,
you know,
yeah.
These organizations are just run by ordinary people like you and me, and they're susceptible to bigotry and the love of power and executing that power. And it's just so dangerous having that much amount of power in people's hands, isn't it?
Yeah, it's extremely dangerous, and it's frightening to the populace. You know, I mean, my spiritual beliefs allow me to be really grounded in the midst of this whole situation. I'm watching it as I know it's not going to last. I know it's going to crumble and fall. And there's those of us who are waiting in the wings for that annihilation, that completion of the end of this type of patriarchal system that we've had for thousands of years, so that we can co-create something better on this earth. I'm amongst those people that believe that our time will come, and those of us who have survived whatever's coming about, which I don't believe is going to be pretty, honestly, but we will be prepared and ready, and the Templars are also prepared and ready to co-create something that's much, much better.
Something I wanted to ask you, Kathleen, seeing as you've spent so much time in South America, have you dabbled much with ayahuasca on your travels?
Have I what?
Have you dabbled in ayahuasca ceremonies?
Oh, yes. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have. A couple times when I had a liver transplant in 2015. Right. In 2010, I was diagnosed with liver cancer, and I had a couple of tumors. From 2010 to 2014, I had 27 cancer tumors. So I went to Peru with a person who's become a friend now, and we hired ayahuasquero, and I went through 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, and I cured myself of 7 cancer tumors. They just disappeared. They were gone as a result of my process that I went through of ayahuasca, the 3 stages that I went through. On the CT scan, when I got back, they were completely gone. They were gone. So that was my first experience with ayahuasca. Now, if anyone's interested in doing ayahuasca, I would sort of push them more towards the Brazilian ayahuasca. It's a different method, that the way they put the herbs and the roots together, because it's a much milder experience. The Peruvian experience was like being hit over the head with a sledgehammer. Right. And all of a sudden, you know, I'm like impacted by this powerful DMT experience, you know. But the second time around, well, you know, because I got rid of those tumors, it was so powerful. And my doctor was blown away, because I didn't tell him I did ayahuasca, but my doctor was blown away. But later in 2015, I started getting, you know, tumors again. And by the end of 2015, I had another couple of tumors that they were very concerned about. And I was on the liver transplant waiting list. So my girlfriend said, hey, well, why don't you come to Brazil? And this was the reason I was in Brazil. I wasn't there researching Templars. I was there to go see John of God with my girlfriend, right? Well, that didn't work. You know, we all know what happened to him. He had a heart attack. He looked at me like he knew me from some past life or something, and he was completely petrified, frightened. 3 days later, he had a heart attack, and not long after that, he was arrested. So, anyway, that didn't work. So I discovered the cave. We ended up going into Alto Paraiso. I discovered the cave. I came home. 9 days later, my house burned to the ground with everything in it. My entire career, I was an art professor, went up in flames. Okay, everything was gone. So 7 weeks after that, I had a liver transplant, but I didn't handle the anti-rejection meds very well, and they were starting to deteriorate, cause problems with my kidneys. So I started doing some spiritual work to make this liver my own. And I also was weaning myself slowly off of these anti-rejection meds under medical supervision. They weren't happy about it, but I was determined and told them I'm going to do it with you or without you. So they decided to do it with me. Well, in 2021, I went to interview the Queen people, these Amazon tribes, to find out about, who led the Templars in, who was it? I wanted to get firsthand, firsthand interview with these people. Well, they invited me into their tribe, and it turns out the chief had apparently recognized me from a past life. He said he'd been waiting for me, and that he wanted me to get their message out about ayahuasca and about the healing properties. And then, and he also agreed to an interview. But then he asked me if I wanted to participate in a healing, and I said, sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, when I participated in this particular ayahuasca ceremony, it was nothing like what I had experienced in Portugal. I mean, excuse me, in Peru. It was completely different experience. This tribe was one of the most loving. There was so much love coming from these people. It was just absolutely, like, almost similar to the near-death experience that I had in 1990, with that kind of intense love. Anyway, what happened was, I had, on faith, I had not taken my anti-rejection meds the day before or this particular day. And I've never taken them since. That's 4 years ago.
Wow.
I'm a medical miracle. And the doctors tested me, tested every week, every month, then every 6 months. Then after a year and a half, he finally said, you're good to go. He said, I don't know what you've done, but you're a miracle. I don't think you'll ever have to take these medications ever again. So that is also interpreted by many people as, what Percival was looking for at the end of his Grail quest. If you know that story, if you're familiar with that story, is a healing. And I had that healing that very few people, I'm probably 1 in a million, that have been able to get off immunosuppression post organ transplant.
Right, because it's normally something you have to take for the rest of your life, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's completely transformed my life, but I never gave up believing. See, that was the thing. I never gave up believing. And that's why I also say that, my life has been it's been a Grail quest. My entire life it's been a Grail quest. That's why the book, that's why I titled it that, A Grail Quest and Discovery of a Mysterious Knights Templar Cave in Brazil. But the real message is the quest. I believe that when we step out of the matrix, we enter into our destiny. We enter into our own Grail quest at that point. And our life becomes something other than working at a bank and getting married and raising children and paying a mortgage. Our life is opened up to something else, to synchronicities that guide us along the path of our destiny. And the ultimate purpose of that is to become united and aware of our unification with our Creator. And to overcome all of our weaker, the weaker aspects of our nature. You can call them 7 sins of pride. You can call them whatever you want. But from the time that I had my near-death experience, I no longer smoke. I don't drink. I don't take any kind of drugs. My life has become purified more and more and more and more the longer that I maintain and continue to consciously move along this path or this quest, whatever it is. And that's, I hear this same thing from other Templars and other people in the Rosicrucian order and in several other esoteric, we have a lot of things cropping up now, that are sort of being rebirthed. We have, these Cathar people that are dedicated to the Cathar order that call themselves Neo-Cathars. Now they are of the same beliefs, they are, they believe that they need to overcome these lower energetic aspects of their personalities in order to strengthen their unification with the Creator. And that's what's really, truly important. And this also allows you to see that same thing in others. It allows you to see the God spark in others. And so therefore, you get to a place where you really can't judge good or evil, like I mentioned earlier. This is why many of the Templars that I know, they don't judge people because they see that God spark in them, and they know that that the darkness is really just ignorance.
Is one of the ultimate aims to escape eternal recurrence through spiritual development? Is reincarnation a fundamental belief for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that it's true for me, and I've just recently made the decision to become part of the Gnostic Order of the Templars myself. I just stayed away from affiliating myself with any groups because I didn't want to be framed in by any rules, or I'm a free spirit. I go when I'm out boots on the ground doing my research, I go where the energy leads me, and that's what has led me to some of these things that nobody else has been able to discover. I intuitively go to them. I intuitively find them. I intuitively meet up with people that have been waiting for me. I met a nun in France. She said, "You've been waiting for me for 20 years." That sent me into St. Baume, and sent me on a spiritual quest to complete some things up there in St. Baume, they're nothing short of otherworldly. That's, my life has really, really changed since the near-death experience. It just sort of jump-started, and at any given time, I feel like I'm in between dimensional realities. I'm so aware of the other dimensional realities, which is a timeless state where time collapses. And we have spiritual beings that support us in our evolutionary process here, for mankind. They're supporting us. And if we can just bypass the ego and get past some of these lower frequency characteristics that people call the 7 sins, or whatever you want to entitle them, if we can just get past these things and get past fear, which is the biggest thing. I think, I came face to face with my fear of death numerous times, with the liver thing and several other occasions. I don't have a fear of death. I don't have it. It's just not there anymore. But I think if we can rid ourselves of fear and our fear of death, because we're immortal beings, for God's sake. We are eternal beings. So what difference does it make? It really doesn't. The difference between this dimension and the other dimensional realities is just this physical body. That's it. Carbon. You know, that's
Yeah.
the only thing that even keeps us here on this planet. That we are born into a carbon-based physical skin, you know.
A meat suit. That's a good positive note, I think, to end on, Kathleen. Before we let you go, maybe you could tell us a bit about what's coming up next for you and what you have in the pipeline, what you're working on, etc.
Well, I have a film out, The Brazilian Templars Mystery, which is out on Gaia TV. It's also on Amazon Prime that people can, they can access. My second film is coming out. Episode 2 is coming out in June in Sedona, Arizona. It'll premiere, and then it will be out on Amazon Prime as well. And that's episode 2. It's The Cave Mysteries and Amazon Miracles is the name of that one. I've currently finished filming for episode 3, 4, and 5, and those will be out within, well, I think episode 3 should be out by the end of this year. But they will also all be out within the next few years. And like I said, I'm working on my book. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can get through to me on my website, which is www.templarsinbrazil.com. And you can email me through templarsinbrazil@gmail.com, or Facebook. It's The Templars in Brazil on Facebook, or Kathleen Ann Ball on Facebook, and also the Grail Quest on TikTok, and the Brazilian Templars on Instagram. And I think that's it.
I guess all those links will be on your website anyway, won't they, Kathleen?
Yeah,
So,
they're all on the website.
Yeah.
You can access them from the website.
I've got a link.
And I do lectures all over the world. I do lectures for groups. So, if you get a hold of me via Facebook or whatever, Instagram or TikTok, or it doesn't matter if you can go through my website. But and I will come and speak. In fact, I'll be in the UK in August again. I'll be speaking in the UK.
Do you know where? Do you know where in the UK you're going to be?
Yeah, at the Atlantis Bookshop in London.
Right. We'll have listeners down there.
Yeah.
To go, you can go meet Kathleen in the flesh, in the meat suit.
And also, we'll have the second film too. Will be available. I'll be showing the second film in August, and we don't have an exact date yet. I'm still waiting for the gal to get back to me with, exact dates. So
cool,
excellent,
exciting. Yeah. Well, Kathleen, thank you so much for your time.
Yes,
it's been really great to hear from you and learn about this mystical, mysterious order. And yeah, thanks again. I'll drop you an email tomorrow with some links on. And thanks for your time.
Yeah.
And
if you send me some links, I'll put it all over my my social media. And
cool.
I've really enjoyed speaking with you. Really enjoyed the show, and I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for inviting me.
No problem. The pleasure was ours. Enjoy the rest of your day, Kathleen, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Sounds great.
Okay. Ta-ra.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, that was great. So we're going to sign off this part, and then us three are going to return in 10 minutes or so.
Yep.
And open the phone lines.
Yes.
Hey.
Yeah, it's been a long while since we've had any callers, hasn't it? A call-in show. So
yeah.
right.
Chatty.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. I love a bit of Templar stuff.
Yeah.
Makes
Really
me want
temples.
to read Dan Brown again.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that was one of the things that got me into it.
Yeah,
the Da Vinci Code, what is it, 20, 30 years ago, maybe?
Yes.
Maybe not 30, maybe 25
Maybe
years
20.
ago. Yeah. So, right, cool. We'll be back in 5-10 minutes. All right. See you in a bit.
Bye.